My daughter was 11 days old when the nanny camera caught my mother-in-law leaning over the bassinet with a pair of scissors. The timestamp was 3:47 in the morning. I was asleep. My husband was asleep, and his mother was in our nursery in the dark, cutting a lock of my baby's hair. I watched the footage the next day, and I felt something I had never felt before, not anger, not exactly, something colder. Something that said, "You have been right about this woman all along, and now you have proof." My daughter was 11 days old when the nanny camera caught my mother-in-law leaning over the bassinet with a pair of scissors. The timestamp was 3:47 in the morning. I was asleep. My husband was asleep, and his mother was in our nursery in the dark, cutting a lock of my baby's hair. I watched the footage the next day, and I felt something I had never felt before, not anger, not exactly. Something colder, something that said, "You have been right about this woman all along, and now you have proof." Let me tell you about Diane. I have been with my husband, Michael, for 7 years. We got together in our late 20s, moved in together after 2 years, married after 4. I knew from the beginning that Diane was going to be a presence in our relationship that required active management. She was the kind of woman who framed control as love and surveillance as concern, who inserted herself into every decision and interpreted the word boundary as a personal affront. She had strong opinions about everything: where we should live, how we should spend our holidays, what kind of furniture was appropriate for our living room. I want to be fair. She loved Michael in a way that was real if consuming. She had raised him alone after his father left when Michael was 10, and the sacrifice and difficulty of that had calcified over the years into a possessiveness she didn't seem to recognize as possessiveness. In her mind, she was simply attentive, devoted, a good mother. In my mind, she was exhausting in a way that made family dinners feel like a sport I hadn't trained for. Michael and I had developed strategies over the years. We were united in how we managed her, which helped. He had the kind of clear-eyed understanding of his mother's patterns that came from decades of experience, and while he loved her, he did not excuse her. When she overstepped, he named it. When she interfered, he redirected. It worked, more or less. It was not easy, but it worked. And then I got pregnant. I don't know exactly when Diane's behavior shifted from manageable to alarming. The pregnancy was joyful and also depleting, as pregnancies are, and Diane's presence during it was simultaneously too much and, to be honest, occasionally useful in the way that having an invested person nearby can be. She brought food. She offered to help decorate the nursery. She was excited about the baby in a way that seemed, when I was generous, like love. The first thing that snagged me was small. We were at dinner, maybe 5 months into the pregnancy, and Diane said something about the baby looking like the family. She was looking at Michael when she said it, and there was something in her expression, a flicker, quickly controlled, that I couldn't name and that I stored away without knowing quite why. The second thing was at a family gathering when she introduced me to a cousin I hadn't met before. The cousin made a comment about family resemblance, and Diane said, very quickly, "We'll see once the baby arrives." It was nothing. It was the kind of nothing that someone later apologizes for having made into something. But I noticed. My relationship with Diane had been, from the beginning, a relationship of noticing, of cataloging small things and trying to determine which were significant and which were just the texture of who she was. I was used to the work of it. I had gotten good at carrying it. My daughter Lily was born on a Tuesday in the spring. She was healthy and loud and furious about having been born, which I took as a sign of character. The first few days were the ordinary chaos of a new baby, the exhaustion and the joy, and the disorientation of being responsible for something so small and so entirely dependent. Jan arrived the day after we came home from the hospital. She had asked to wait. We had asked, actually. Michael and I had a conversation specifically about this. And she had agreed with visible effort to give us 2 days before visiting. She arrived on day 2 with food and gifts and a kind of barely contained vibration of excitement that, in the fog of new parenthood, I was too tired to examine. She asked to hold Lily immediately. I said yes. I watched her hold my daughter, and something in her face, some guard or performance, dropped entirely. She looked at Lily with pure, unguarded love. I thought in that moment, whatever else she is, this is real. She loves this baby. She asked to stay with us for a few days to help during the newborn period. We said no. We had agreed in advance. This was part of our plan. She said she understood, and she left with a smile that I had learned to recognize as a controlled one. She came back 3 nights later. Should explain the camera. The nanny camera was my idea, not because I had a specific fear or not a named one, but because I was going back to work in 12 weeks, and I wanted to be able to check on whoever we eventually hired as childcare. I bought it before Lily was born and set it up in the nursery while I was still pregnant. It was a simple device, motion-activated, linked to my phone. At 3:47 in the morning on the 11th day of Lily's life, it sent a motion alert to my phone. I was awake anyway. I was awake at 3:47 most mornings, feeding or checking or simply lying in the particular vigilance of early parenthood. I looked at the alert. I opened the live feed. Diane. She had a key to our house. We had given it to her for emergencies, with extensive conversation about what constituted an emergency. A sleeping baby was not an emergency. 3:47 in the morning was not an emergency. She had let herself in while we slept and made her way to the nursery. She was leaning over the bassinet with a small pair of scissors. She was careful and precise. She cut a section of hair from the back of Lily's head, a section small enough that I didn't notice it the next morning until I looked at the footage and went specifically to look for it. She put the hair in a small Ziploc bag that she had brought with her. Then she left. I watched the footage in our kitchen the next morning while Michael was in the shower. I watched it 3 times. Then I went and stood in the nursery doorway and looked at my daughter sleeping in her bassinet and felt the cold thing I described at the beginning. I knew even then what it was for. The hair. I'm not naive, and I had been noticing Diane's behavior for 11 months, and the only thing that makes sense when someone takes a newborn's hair in the middle of the night is a DNA test. She thought Lily wasn't Michael's. I want to be precise about my feelings in that moment. There was anger, enormous, immediate anger. There was violation. There was a bone-deep sense of having been suspected of something I had not done by someone who had been in my life for 7 years and should have known better. There was also, underneath all of it, a very particular kind of hurt that comes from confirming a fear you had tried to talk yourself out of. I waited until Michael was dressed and had coffee before I showed him the footage. I'm not going to describe that moment in detail because it belongs to him in a way I don't want to give away. I will say that his response was immediate and unambiguous. He was furious. He was not furious at me. I want to say that clearly. He was furious at his mother in the way that people are furious when someone they love does something that cannot be excused or minimized or managed, something that breaks through all the careful accommodation they've spent years building. He called her. She didn't answer. He drove to her house. I stayed home with Lily and I sat on the kitchen floor and I cried, not from sadness exactly, but from the release of something I had been holding for a very long time. The confrontation is Michael's to tell, not mine. What I can tell you is what he came home with. He came home 2 hours later and he sat down across from me and he told me everything. Anne had in fact sent the hair to a private DNA testing company. The test she ordered was a paternity test, using a profile from Michael's childhood medical records that she had, I still don't fully understand how, obtained or constructed. She had been planning this since before Lily was born. She had been planning it, I believe, since the early months of my pregnancy, when she started watching Michael's face for signs of resemblance and noting the cousin's comment about family. Why, what had made her think this? Michael asked her this directly and she told him the truth, which was both less and more than I expected. She had found, about a year before Lily was born, a message on Michael's phone. She had looked at his phone, she had not been invited to look at his phone, and she had found a message from a number she didn't recognize. The message was affectionate. It said essentially that the sender missed him. She had assumed the message was from another woman. She had never confronted Michael about it. She had simply kept it, a seed of suspicion that she watered privately for a year. The message was from a friend of Michael's who was gay and who expressed affection physically. That was how he communicated with everyone he cared about, male or female, family or friend. There was nothing romantic in it. Michael showed me the message thread when he got home, and it was completely, evidently platonic to anyone reading the full context. Deanne had only seen the one message, decontextualized and filtered through a year of simmering suspicion. She had also, she admitted, never fully trusted me. She thought I had married Michael for financial security. Michael is successful but not wealthy. This was genuinely not a calculation I had made, but she had made it on my behalf without asking. The test results came back while Michael was still at her house. Lily, of course, was his daughter. 100% certainty. Deanne showed him the results when they arrived and she didn't apologize immediately. First, she said she was relieved. Then she tried to explain. Then finally, she said she was sorry. I'm going to be honest about the aftermath, because I think the honest version is more useful than the clean one. Michael and I didn't handle this perfectly. We had fights about how to respond, about whether to remove Deanne's key, about how much distance to establish, about whether her apology was enough. We had fights that were about Deanne but were really about the accumulated weight of years of managing her, of the work I had done, and the ways I had felt alone in it, and the ways Michael had tried but couldn't always see what I saw. You're still together. We are better in some ways than we were before this happened, because things that were not being said are now being said. Deanne no longer has a key to our house. She visits on an established schedule. The visits are supervised in the way that I don't leave her alone with Lily, which is something I have not announced as a policy but simply as a practice, and Deanne has accepted it without comment, which I take as evidence of guilt or growth or some combination of both. Lily is 8 months old now. She is perfect and maddening and has 2 bottom teeth and a laugh that makes me understand what people mean when they say they would do anything for someone. Anne holds her at the visits and looks at her with that unguarded love I saw on the second day, and I believe it's real, and I also believe that love is not always enough. That love that includes suspicion and surveillance and scissors at 3:47 in the morning is love that has conditions. And my daughter doesn't have to earn her grandmother's love. She doesn't have to prove anything to anyone. I installed a second camera. Not in the nursery, we've removed the first one. Lily is too big for the bassinet now. But at the front door, so I know who comes into my house and when. I'm not sorry about that. I'm not sorry about any of it. I am just a mother who watches.